All right. So actually an introduction to me is part of my presentation, so this will work out great. So as Anne mentioned, I am Natalie Gertz-Young. I am the Education and Information Coordinator at Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District. That is quite a mouthful. So who here knows about soil and water conservation districts and like what they do, where they are? We got some hands, good, because we don't always have hands. That's awesome. Okay, so let's hope for the best here. It was working earlier. There we go. Okay, so a little bit about me. I actually born and raised in Chardon, Ohio, just over the river and through the woods. And I have my bachelor's actually in psychology from the College of Wooster. And I actually focused on conservation psychology. So we heard Claudia actually talk about eco-psychology. Conservation psychology is a closely related field. And it's really why people choose to preserve the environment or not is really kind of the fundamental question that it's based around. So I had to do a thesis, and it was about, does viewing nature scenes aid in reduction of stress in college students? So that was kind of my whole thing. Then that led into me going to get my master's in environmental studies with an emphasis in environmental education from Antioch University New England. That is kind of the graduate school satellite of the Antioch College that's in Yellow Springs, Ohio. So, yay, no grades. I swear, the grad school, they're a little bit more rigid, but not much. It was a really wonderful environment to receive my graduate schooling in. And then after that, I fell in love with New England. I wanted to live there. But all of my family lives here. So my husband and I moved back. We don't think we regret it, but... and then I worked for a few years at the Holden Arboretum. I had a bunch of different jobs there. I did some school programs, I did some public programs, worked on some signage. I got a lot of great experiences there. I'm also a naturalist at the Marsh Nature Center, which is owned and operated by the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. And my full-time gig is as the Education and Information Coordinator at Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District. I think it's just a little slow. All right, so a little bit about soil and water conservation districts. So a lot of people, they've heard the name, but they're not exactly sure what they do and why they exist. So starting in 1932, as a lot of you may know, this was not a great time for our country. Not only was the economy doing very poorly, but farmland across the U.S. was suffering. It was suffering from not only human causes, but also natural caused disasters. And they kind of combined to form this superstorm of terribleness. So, human caused parts. So, we deforested areas. So, here in Ohio, we went from when European settlers originally came here, it was somewhere between 80 to 95% forested. So, that whole a squirrel could jump from tree to tree to tree and make it from Cleveland to Cincinnati, that whole spiel you may have learned in elementary school. But we cut almost all of that down. We were at 15 or less percent. Only 100 years later, less than 100 years later. So that wreaks some havoc on your soils. Then, further west, we plowed the prairies. As we heard that statistic, less than 1/10 of 1% of the prairies are existing in this country. So that also caused some big problems. And we just kept growing the same crops over and over and over again on the same plot of land. We didn't give the soil a break, and we were planting the same thing year after year. Then hit drought, and when we did get rain, it was big gully washers of rainstorms. And it caused some pretty awful stuff. So this is in South Dakota after one of the big dust storms. This is kind of more what have happened here in Ohio. It would wash these big gullies in farm fields. They weren't leaving anything on the land, so whenever we get these rainstorms, it would just wash all the soil away. So back in 1935, a couple years later, after all that kind of started, they thought that the federal government thought it was really important to prevent that from ever happening again. Oh boy. Okay, they thought that should never happen. So they created the Soil Conservation Service. The Soil Conservation Service was a permanent part of the USDA, and this quote really, really hits it. So the wastage of soil and moisture resources on farm, grazing, and forest lands is a menace to national welfare. That's a pretty powerful quote right there. Ooh, oh boy. Watch, they'll all kick in at the same time, because that's usually what happens. There we go. Okay, so the Soil Conservation Service promoted keeping the soils covered. This wasn't always, they didn't always recommend the best thing. So this, for example, is a field covered in kudzu. So it'll prevent erosion. It'll cause a lot of other problems. Rotation and strip cropping. So you'll still see this today. So kind of especially on hillsides, different crops take the different things out of the soils. It helps prevent erosion. So that is a way to, farm in a way that's a little bit better. Stream buffers and grassed waterways. So allowing some trees along your streams. And if you do have like a drainage swale, having that planted in something that can maybe help suck up extra nutrients and prevent soil erosion. And additionally, they would pay farmers to leave their land fallow. So this was one of the primary tools that they used in the 1930s and early 1940s, was just don't plant your fields. Let the soil regenerate. Although it can take 50 to 100 years for just an inch of topsoil to develop. So that's kind of, you'd have to pay them for an entire generation to be able to rebuild the soil that was lost. Just a fraction of the soil that was lost. And then they also created the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 30s. And what they did is they went in and they planted a lot of trees to try and reforest some land. And it also gave young men who were unmarried jobs. So that was another thing that was lacking. So it kind of was a two birds with one stone situation. And these are dams that were built actually in Wayne National Forest here in Ohio to help prevent, because they had some serious gully erosion there. So this was to help prevent that erosion. Okay, but how do conservation districts come into this? So they were kind of the local boots on the ground. Conservation districts are very much kind of grassroots. So while we're a government organization, so I technically work for the state, but I'm designated to work within Lake County. That's kind of how they work. But every county had to decide that they wanted one of these. So in Lake County, that was in 1946. And actually, Lake and Geauga counties were together at a certain point, I believe. And so they approved, went through the voters, and so we've been around about 70 years. And we started really just protecting soil and water for the sake of agriculture more than anything. But things have certainly changed. So every county is different. You guys who aren't from up here in maybe Northeast Ohio know that your landscape is different, your land uses are different. So we're really trying to serve the public. And Northeast Ohio is certainly one of the more urbanized and more densely populated areas of the state. So kind of what we focus on is small and specialized and urban agriculture. Smart development, so making sure that when developers come in and do things, we're doing it in a smart way. Protecting land with easements, whether that's conservation easements or protecting farmland with agricultural easements. Water quality, this is probably the biggest part of my job, is water quality. So stormwater education is pretty much what pays the bills for me. So stormwater prevention, watershed planning, erosion and sediment control, so making sure all that soil stays on construction sites. We also do a lot of landowner assistance, and we're big promoters of backyard conservation, which is kind of, I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. So we've kind of come a long way here. So like we mentioned, the kudzu during the 1930s to prevent soil erosion, soil and water conservation districts haven't always made the best recommendations. So if someone comes in, they say I have erosion along my stream. You know, back in the 70s and 80s, we probably would have given them a sheet of paper that had a list of species on it. That would include things like autumn or Russian olive, or that was multiflora rose, glossy buckthorn. I actually just threw away all of these materials last year in our office because they were like in the back of the closet, and I like couldn't believe that this had ever happened. And we've also done tree sales for Lake County Soil and Water's been around about 70 years, so maybe 45 of the 70 years we've done tree sales or seedling sales, and we haven't always chosen the best species for that either. So European alder, calorie pear, and a lot of other really bad ones. So everything from English ivy to Vinca minor to the Japanese Pachysandra, honeysuckle. We sold honeysuckle for years. Now everybody's trying to get grants to get money to rip it out. Crown vetch, all of these things. Maybe not the best. Now we consider ourselves native plant advocates. We've definitely changed somewhere between the late 90s and early 2000s, our mindset's changed. People realize that we should be planting native. If we want to be helping to rebuild our ecosystem, even if it's a changed and altered ecosystem from what it was when the settlers came, native plants are going to be best. So we kind of have goals, and some of those goals are getting more people to be interested in and actually planting native plants. And two, to increase the native plant biodiversity throughout the county, no matter where you live, regardless of what type of community you live in. So Lake County is kind of a mix. So we have kind of the suburban area. If you want to think of a place, that would be like Mentor. Mentor is kind of our big suburban central area. Then we have our eastern part of the county, which is still very rural. Madison Village is still very rural, most of it. And then we also have kind of that on the outskirts of what you would consider the suburbs of Cleveland. So we have Willowick, which is really right there next to Cuyahoga County, and it's very much more city blocks set up. So we really want to build these native kind of biodiverse plant communities within all of these different types of neighborhoods so that we can bring the native wildlife and we can kind of do good things regardless of where we live, because we don't always get to choose the type of community we live in. So why? We're doing this for wildlife. We're doing this stormwater reduction. So look at those attractive roots on those native plants. And if we see our turf grass with the little red circle there, you can see that our turf grass lawn has roots that are 1 to 2 inches deep. But if we look at our compass plant, it has roots that are 12 feet deep. Which one do you think allows more runoff to absorb? It's pretty much a no-brainer. Also, native plants naturally require less herbicide and pesticide use. So if we can get people to use less, we're setting the bar low here, guys. So use less. Then that's going to help. There's less of it that's going to get into our streams and rivers, less of it that's going to be, our pollinators to be exposed to, and less of it that's going to end up in our groundwater. So all of these things are a positive. So we're also in a very interesting position in Lake County. Some of you may not know, but Lake County, Ohio contains kind of what we're considered the capital of the nursery industry. If you've ever driven through kind of Perry Township or Madison Township in the springtime, it's just fields of flowering trees. So we have many acres of nurseries. A lot of them are not direct to public, they're only wholesale, which is why many people don't realize it. But they're supplying plants to people all across the country. And a lot of those plants are our no-nos, or are, middle of the road. They're not a negative to the environment, but they're not a positive either. So we've always had to be pro-native plant, but also be pro-nursery. And the only way for nurseries to change is if the public demands it. So if you have a business, you're going to sell what people want. And if people want Japanese barberry, you're going to sell Japanese barberry. It's nothing you could fault them for. But we've seen in the past couple of years, they're offering so many more natives than they ever have in the past. And that is because people like all of you are demanding it, saying, I want these plants. And we're seeing huge increases in it, things that we couldn't find a couple years ago, we can find now. And that's really shows that we're on the right track. So kind of the main ways that we promote native plants at our offices is, one, through restoration and stormwater retrofit projects. This is a really beautiful planting that just went in. This is at the Mentor Lagoons. Through our tree sales, and currently we're involved with the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative's milkweed pod collection. So this is just a little smattering. So to go over just two of our stormwater retrofit, and the other one is a restoration, and how we promoted native plants in each one of those. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Arcola Creek Fairview Cemetery restoration. This is kind of in process right now. We don't even have any plants in the ground yet. We haven't even done any of the earth moving yet. But I will tell you that restorations in the past, a lot of times we would be planting things like Streamco purple willow, things that are not native willows, or plants that aren't native but do a good job of stabilizing a stream. And that is different now. And the other one is called Growing Green on Main Street, which is a roadside bioretention project. So for the Fairview Cemetery restoration, it's going through a section of Arcola Creek, which is a creek that runs directly to Lake Erie. It doesn't run into a larger tributary. And it is on the far eastern portion of our county. It kind of runs from the edge of Perry, runs from Perry all the way to Geneva in Ashtabula County. And this is what the section of the stream looks like this spring, is what it looked like. You can see it does not look very nice. It's not pretty to look at, We can see there's a lot of erosion, a lot of bank slumping. The erosion was so bad, they just covered the one side in concrete and asphalt, and not even in a clever way, they literally just dumped it there. It needs a little help. And actually this didn't used to be a problem, but a development was put in right on the opposite side. My back would be facing it here. And when that went in, it increased the erosion that was going into here. So there was more stormwater that was hitting the creek as a result of that. So fortunately, it's located on public property. So it's kind of the back part of the lot that butts up to the elementary school, Madison South Elementary School. And the other side is the cemetery. So we thought, this kind of seems like a perfect spot. Madison Village is very, very interested in having this be a nice place. If you're going to the cemetery, it would be, a lot of people walk their dogs there, not to mention if you have to be there for a less happy circumstance, you'd probably want a nice place to be. So we've done a couple things to kind of get rolling on this. And for the past 2 years, since we knew that this was going to happen, we had taken their 5th graders from Madison South Elementary School. They have a very, very popular science club with their 5th graders. And in fact, they had to break it into 2 groups. They have their entire grade is in science club, which is just amazing to think about. So we did biological stream monitoring with these kids to kind of see how healthy this stream is right now. We were really surprised. We were pulling great stuff out of that stream. We just weren't pulling big numbers. So that's telling us that this water isn't horribly polluted or anything like that. It's just there isn't enough substrate. There isn't enough habitat to support large numbers of these critters. And the work on this project is going to start actually next month. So the planting will be happening in the springtime, and these kids are going to help us do that too. So to show you what plants are going in now, it's all natives are going in this time. So we're going to have some red maple. We're going to have some sycamores going in. We're going to have some swamp white oaks. Personal favorite of mine. Where'd it go? Buttonbush, personal favorite of mine. Great nectar plant. Pollinator magnet. Would grow in a bathtub. You got a wet spot in your lawn, plant one of those. Red osier dogwood. Beautiful for winter interest. Black willow. Few things stabilize a stream bank better than a willow. And also silky dogwood too. So just a little bit different look there. And the other areas will be planted with a native floodplain mix. And the areas that abut kind of the grassy area that go over to where the formal cemetery is will be planted in the Freedom Lawn mix. I know that Ohio Prairie Nursery sells a Freedom Lawn, and you just only have to mow it not very often at all. So that'll reduce mowing and some of the maintenance costs associated. Now the other project is Growing Green on Main Street. This one just finished, and the funding was made available for this one through the Surface Water Improvement Fund. And it was through Main Street in Madison Village. Has anybody been to Madison Village who's here? Anyone? Most people wouldn't describe Main Street as being, I don't know, awe-inspiring or anything like that. It's kind of like a cute little town, but it looks a little, I don't know, frumpy maybe. Maybe that's the word. I'm not even quite sure it is. So one of the goals, we had a lot of goals with this project. One, Arcola Creek runs directly behind these buildings, and they flood all the time. Anytime there's a real big rainstorm, this floods here. And when you look at how it's placed, you're like, wow, they must be getting a lot of water and it must have nowhere to go. So it's to increase infiltration to prevent that flooding, reduce runoff in general, because this is a parking area and a big wide road. It's a sea of concrete. And also a huge one was to improve aesthetics. So it wasn't that pretty of a place to look at, and they wanted to improve it. And at first, many of these local businesses were not happy that this was going to happen because there was going to be construction in front of their businesses for 6 months. Actually, it was more like 6 weeks, but the potential was there for it to be longer. And they weren't happy about it. Then when we showed them what it could look like and showed them some of the statistics that it increases foot traffic and increases business if you have a treed street versus an untreed street, they were all about it. Back to that one again. Okay, so this is what it looked like before on top. The fact that it's winter or early spring doesn't really help the situation at all. But if you notice, there's just a couple of tiny little scraggly trees and tree vaults, a lot of concrete, not a lot else going on. The parking goes right up to the sidewalk, which goes right into those businesses. Now, if we look underneath, some permeable pavement, so the brick pavers went in, so water can infiltrate in those. And the water from not only the building and the sidewalk runs into those, but they're also designed that the water from the street also runs into those planters there. And we're hoping that these get a little more, they fill in a little more, because they do look a little bleak right now, but we're pretty sure with some of the species that were chosen that they're going to fill in and look really nice in a couple of years. So this was not 100% native planting. We did request, when working with the firm that designed it, we did request all natives, but we got mostly native, so we'll take it. So Virginia sweetspire, winterberry, bayberry, some Amsonia, which technically isn't native to Ohio, but is a southeast U.S. native, so it's good. Red maples. The red maple was supposed to be an exotic species, but we ended up with red maples instead, so we were really happy about that. Coneflower, bee balm, little blue stem, barren strawberry, and then our non-natives where we had a tree lilac, Japanese trees lilac that went in, and some little leaf lindens. It is tricky with projects like this, especially ones that are receiving runoff from the street. As you know, up here we get a lot of snow, and that means a lot of salt. So these species do have to be extremely salt tolerant to be able to tolerate living and thriving in these environments. So that certainly limits the species that you can pick from. So those were both really successful. And then here's kind of another success story that was really all about listening to what people wanted. So our tree sale. So we've been doing tree seedling sales in April. It's usually the weekend before Arbor Day. I do that so if I have any plants left over, I can foist them on people on Arbor Day, and I don't have to take care of them anymore. So we've been doing about 45 of the last 70 years. They're almost always bare root, and a lot of them we get from out-of-state nurseries because while Lake County is the nursery capital, nobody does bare root in Lake County. And it's only select species, so we can't offer 60 different species. We just don't have that capacity. So our tree sale has kind of come a long way, and it's continuing to change with what people want. So kind of the old school way of doing it was we really catered to large landowners. And that's because our county consisted mostly of people who owned a lot of property. They maybe owned a woodlot. They had some farm fields. So we would offer very utilitarian, kind of geared, mixed species packets that would, for example, like nut-bearing hardwoods to enhance your woodlot, or pond species, so things that like their feet wet to stabilize the edge of your pond, or things for windrows. That's really kind of what we were focused on. And then we would offer a couple individual species, but in large quantities, like 25, 50, 100. And for a while, it was really successful, because if you have a large property and you do want to put a windrow in, you're going to want a lot of something, and you might not care as much what it is or how it looks. And we often sold non-natives, and even some species we now consider invasive. So here, actually, I looked through our old newsletters, and I found one from 1988. In 1988, we sold a packet that consisted of sweet gum, Norway spruce, viburnum, doesn't say what kind of viburnum, dogwood, and forsythia. So we got some hits and some misses there. We were also selling crown vetch, which that's a big no-no now. Blue spruce and birch, European birch, not even our own native birch. So this kind of shows you this was pretty common. This is what everybody across the state was doing, and really across the country, because tree sales are something that a lot of soil and waters have done for a long time. It was less labor intensive, so you could make a lot of packets of 50 and bundles of seedlings and ship them off pretty quick. People come and pick them up. It's easy, doesn't take a lot of prep work, and it was really great for those large landowners and traditional farmers. But things definitely change. So now, when you have a county that has become pretty rapidly urbanized, the needs of the people in your community change. And so we changed with it. So we upped our number of species. We were starting to offer maybe 12. Mostly native. We'd throw an occasional one that people asked for in there. We weren't always picky about making sure where they came from, or like if it said alder, yeah, it might have been that European alder. We weren't always keeping a close eye on that kind of thing. And then we started offering mixed species packets that contained about 12 to 15 individual seedlings, but of kind of mixed variety. And then we started offering conservation goods like wildflower seed mixes. They weren't always all native. Sometimes they contained some non-native annuals. Birdhouses, rain barrels, that kind of thing. And these, changing with the times, did help. It was a good thing. But things continue to change, and today, because native plants have become more popular, we said, why not go all native? Let's not sell any plants that aren't at minimum Eastern US natives. And I try to do almost all Ohio native. Every now and then, like this year, we're selling a couple that aren't, like we're selling Allegheny chinkapin this year because we had a request for it, and we're okay with selling that one. We've also added leaf plants, so the Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership Group that puts out native plant lists every year. They feature 3 separate ones. We're making an effort to offer all 3 of those every year. It changes. And we're not just selling bare root now. We're willing to sell some containerized plants. It's a little more work on our end to do containerized plants. We have to source them locally, which is not a problem. We'd rather source locally, but because they are heavier and larger, and the cost can be prohibitive for a lot of people, since containerized plants do cost more. We also expanded our conservation goods that we sell, so native and local wildflower seed mixes. We offer Ohio Prairie nursery seeds. Birdhouses, garden cover crops, we've offered those a couple of years. Now we offer composters and rain barrels, and I always order a lot of extra bare root plants so people can mix and match and kind of impulse buy when they show up. There's a lot of that, by the way. There's a lot of people, I just can't resist, I just need more. My husband's gonna be so mad at me if we get that a lot. And I'm always up for suggestions. If somebody says, why don't you consider selling this? Absolutely, I'll look into it. So the results of this have been pretty dramatic. So I started about 3 years ago, and the first year I stepped in was like after we were supposed to even have plants ordered. It was like the worst time of year to be planning a tree sale. And we didn't do that great that year, but it had been pretty similar to previous years, the recent past. I more than doubled our profit on our last tree sale based on 3 years ago. I increased our number of orders, not really by that much. Maybe 15% I increased the orders, but that just meant people were ordering more because it's what they wanted to be buying. I also started offering packet sizes, individual species. I don't group anything together because you might want a redbud, but you don't want a red osier dogwood. I don't want to clump things together that you probably don't want. People know more about plants now than they used to, so I like to trust that people know what they want. Other things that have contributed to this is social media really helps. If you have an organization and you're trying to sell something or trying to get the word, it's okay to pay for Facebook advertising. It's actually a really, like $15 will get you a lot of views, thousands of unique views, so that's really good. Also, when NRCS had their Year of the Pollinator a couple of years ago, got a ton of people interested in this. We had people who were, I'm so excited I have milkweed in my yard. I want to add more wildflowers. Are you going to sell wildflower packets next year for the pollinators? Yes, absolutely, we are. Also, native landscaping is gaining popularity. As we can tell from today and from last year and all these other amazing books that are coming out that are teaching us how we can integrate this into our landscape and not tick our neighbors off. Our sale is already active, so we do have flyers on our table. I don't mean to sell this and push it on you guys. I just wanted to let you know it's available. Our birdhouses are not yet priced. So, and the last thing is we are doing milkweed pod collection right now. In fact, pretty much every soil and water district is in the area, except for I think Portage County isn't. But majority of the soil and water conservation districts in the state of Ohio are collecting milkweed pods, specifically common milkweed. I don't know why they're not interested in butterfly weed or swamp milkweed, but they're not. So we're collecting common milkweed pods through the end of the month. It's from September 1st to October 30th, and I'm sure that's because it's a statewide initiative, because none of ours were ready until October here. So we've kind of been getting a lot the last couple of weeks. And this is for the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative. And a lot of their projects they partner with ODOT for a lot of their projects to do, for example, like highway plantings to make kind of monarch corridors throughout the state. Because we did see earlier where we've sprayed and gotten rid of all of our milkweed that, there's nothing for the monarchs to eat anymore. So it's really to help them out. Our county has taken it a step further. We are happy to accept your swamp and butterfly weed seeds because either we want them or we'll find someone who does. So when people have been dropping off swamp milkweed and butterfly weed, we are very, very happy to accept it. And all of this really is just the beginning. We're always doing more things. We're always willing to work with other partners to promote these things that really, really are a part of our goals as an organization. So, for example, talking here, it's outside of my county, but I'm more than happy to do it because this really does support what we're trying to do. And if you have any questions, you are more than happy to ask. Yes?
So I was very excited to get my milkweed seeds, but how do I plant them?
So I'm going to say what I would do. I would throw them on the ground in the area you want them to be, kind of after or around the first frost, hard frost. Okay. Milkweeds, full sun. They they need stratification, so that freeze-thaw cycle of our winter is good for them. Some people do it themselves and put it in their freezer. I'm a lazy gardener, and I let nature do it for me. So, And folks that I've heard who have tried to like do it themselves and started inside, they're like, the ones I just put outside grew, and the ones I did myself didn't. And I'm sure there's some people here who have had pretty good success with that as well. Yes?
I'm curious, and I know this isn't specifically your program, but at what stage are they wanting, I saw a truckload of green milkweed pods. They want them when they're still green?
That picture, I think actually the ODNR collected those. And milkweeds, as long as they split or they break with pressure and the seeds are brown, it's okay to collect them. But we've been like, it's better for you to give them to us turning brown or all the way brown than all the way green. Yeah, we've been trying to push the word about how to appropriately collect milkweed seeds, especially because this was running from the beginning of September, and up here, none of our pods were ready in September. So we're like, don't give me them yet. Wait a while. So we did give guidelines as to how to appropriately collect them so that we're not wasting it. And collecting the seeds, it's known that if you have an established stand of milkweed, collecting the seeds isn't going to diminish your stand at all. So that's another good thing to note.
After planting of milkweed seed, one of my favorite ways, of course, you have the down removed, and there are easy ways to do that. Let's check out online. Is wait till the last snowfall, what you think is going to be the last snowfall. I call it the rotting snow. When the snow is melting in the warm sun, say March or something like that, you can actually scatter the brown seed, and the sun will warm them, and they'll drop below the snow, become completely saturated, go through the freeze and thaw because winter's not over, and you can see where you're tossing them. So if you have a limited amount of seed, you know you're getting good coverage. It's not my idea, it came from Prairie Moon, but it's a great idea.
That is a great idea.
The other question I had for you was, can out-of-county people order your plants?
They absolutely can. Now, we only have 2 pickup days, and that is April 14th and 15th of next year. So as long as you can come pick up your plants, we had somebody drive from Pennsylvania, I think, last year to pick up plants. He drove from Erie to pick up plants. So we do accept out of county. I do recommend you looking at whether your county offers a tree sale as well. They all do it a little different. I know Cuyahoga County doesn't offer a tree sale, but this year they did a wildflower seed sale. I know Geauga County does theirs in the fall now.
Well, no.
They were doing it in spring. Yeah, and they do a lot of container plants. So it's just different. Every county is a little bit different, just like we all operate differently, and our tree sales do too. So anyone from out of county is always willing to buy seedlings from any other county. We're just happy to get the plants in your hands.
Thank you very
All
much.
right.